All right, it is Indian removal time. If you missed class today, we went over the answers that should be in this chart. And as you can see, many of the items are highlighted, so they will be on your quiz. Your quiz is Monday, the 25th. So as we go through this, you'll want to make sure you have the right answers, and you should probably highlight what I have highlighted. As always, you could just pause the video if you need more time to do what you need to do. You could do a split screen or you can toggle back and forth, but let's get this file open and ready to go. And you could press pause at this moment if you need time to do that. All right, here we go. So your assignment was to read lesson 3 of module 10 and fill in this chart that describes what the removal was like for the Choctaw, the Creek, the Cherokee, and the Seminole. We're putting in what state they lived in before they left, why they're being moved. Each one has a slightly different reason, and how each of them reacted. Actually, I picked these 4 tribes because they have different reactions and different results of those reactions, and that's why I picked these 4. They're not the only natives that are removed, but because it's a good sample of the different ways that tribes reacted, I thought it would give you a good picture of the different ways that they reacted and also the different results because of those reactions. It kind of gives you an idea of what their options were and what some of them did and how that turned out. So here we go. The Choctaw are living in Mississippi, and they're told to leave basically because the Americans want to clear land for farming. Obviously, Mississippi is a very fertile place. There are many opportunities there for establishing plantations that could be very profitable, especially if they're worked by slaves. And so Americans would have definitely had their eye on that land. The Choctaw reacted actually very peacefully. They ended up signing a treaty that gave their land to the government pretty much willingly. They didn't want any trouble. And so they did give in and ended up marching over to Indian Territory. Unfortunately, the supplies were low and they were not treated very well. So many of them are going to die along the way. And this came as a surprise to a lot of people, especially the Choctaw. They didn't realize that it was going to be that bad. They believed the government and the army when they were told that they'd be taken care of and everything would be okay. So, lesson learned, I suppose. Before I move on, I'm actually going to come down here at the bottom of the page. I probably should have started with a definition of the Indian Removal Act, just to lay the groundwork here. In 1830, of course, Andrew Jackson had been president now for a couple years, and he's been working to get the Native Americans east of the Mississippi River removed and relocated to what they call Indian Territory, which is Oklahoma. That's going to be established as the new American Indian homeland. It's still American territory run by the government, but it's reserved for Native Americans. And I'll be showing you a map of this here in a minute. So that is what's happening. Indians are being removed and relocated to a specific place. It's not like they say, oh, you just have to leave here. We don't care where you go. We just don't want you here. They did care where they went, and they told them where they had to go, and that was Oklahoma. Now imagine how different it would be moving from a place like Mississippi over to Oklahoma. I don't know how much you know about either of those places, but I will tell you they are very, very different. Mississippi is a hot, humid, fertile place with lots of resources and would have been pretty easy to survive. They're farming in Mississippi. Obviously, they can hunt and gather as well, but it's great farmland, and the Choctaw have been farming there for generations and generations. So that's what they're used to, and now they're being relocated to scrubland, basically, in Oklahoma, that is not going to be easy to survive in, that's for sure. Oklahoma's a rough place, especially back then. Now we've developed it, right? And it's fine. It's no sweat. You can go live there just like you live anywhere else. But at the time it was undeveloped, and these natives, it's like you're dropping them on another planet. It might as well be. So I'm going to go over to the online book actually and show you a map of what's going on here. So we just did the Choctaw. So I'm going to go ahead and tap on that on my interactive map here to show you where they're leaving and where they're going to. As you can see, Oklahoma is over there in the west. That's what OK stands for, just north of Texas. And the Choctaw are being relocated from mid to southern Mississippi. So that's a subtropical climate zone for sure, very fertile land. And water is easily accessible as well. And you can see the journey that they took is that green arrow right there. They headed west, and that journey was deadly. Many of them died and got sick. So the word is out now that if the government comes and tells you to leave, be prepared. It's going to be a rough travel. And that's a good segue into our next tribe, which is the Creek tribe. So word does get out. The Creek are living in Alabama and Georgia, so also in the deep south, very similar climate and environment as Mississippi. They would have had the same experiences. And they're being told to leave basically for the same reason that the Choctaw were. American farmers wanted the land for cotton plantations specifically because that's great land for growing cotton. And cotton was in very high demand at the time and was a very profitable crop. So again, people want their farmland, and so they're telling them to leave. Now, the Creek have heard the stories about the Choctaw and how terrible that relocation was. So they decide, forget that, we're not going to do what you want us to do. They resisted removal. However, they do end up losing to the U.S. Army, and they're removed anyway. And they're going to be removed in chains because they resisted. So their trip is going to be even worse than the Choctaws, unfortunately, because they are treated like combatants. I'm going to go back over to the map and show you their journey, actually along with the journey of the Chickasaw as well, which is not on your chart, but we might as well look at them too since they're on the map. So the Chickasaw are also coming from Mississippi, and now we also have the Creek coming from Alabama and Georgia. All right, let's keep going. The Cherokee have a very interesting story. As you can see, Indian removal was authorized in 1830. So the Cherokee are living in Georgia. And of course, everybody's told that they have to leave in 1830, but many of the Native Americans just ignored that order and did not leave. And then that's when things can sometimes get ugly. So Indian removal does not happen all at once. It happens over the course of years because it takes time for the government to root these people out and force them to leave. So the Cherokee ended up trying different things. They're going to try to assimilate into white culture, into white American culture. They're going to start changing their names to American-sounding names. They're going to dress like Americans dressed. They're going to learn English. They're going to start schools to provide formal education the same way Americans do. They even started a newspaper written in English. They're going to just try to act and assimilate with the Americans because they figured that was a good strategy. They thought, well, maybe the Americans just want to get rid of us because we're so different from them. So let's try to act like them and live like them, and then maybe they'll let us stay. And that actually worked for a while. Everybody was kind of getting along. The sticking point was when gold was discovered on their land in Georgia. And then basically the government said, okay, that's it. You've stayed long enough. You've overstayed your welcome, so to speak. You've definitely stayed longer than we said that you could. You were ordered in 1830 to leave, and we've given you extensions, and you're still not leaving. You really need to go. The Cherokee were refusing to leave, and they actually ended up suing the state of Georgia. And believe it or not, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled in their favor. The Supreme Court agreed with the Cherokee and said, you know what? According to all these treaties that have been signed between the Cherokee and the United States government over the course of many, many years, going all the way back to Revolutionary times, you are right. You should not have to leave your land. So that was a huge win, and the Cherokee were very excited. In fact, all Native Americans all over were excited because they thought this would set the precedent and Indians would not be removed anymore, and that's it. Like I said, they're trying to fit in. They're trying to, quote, act white, I guess is the best way to put it, and assimilate, which means like work their way into society and just kind of blend in, which worked for a little while, but not permanently. So the gold is discovered. They win the court case, but the state of Georgia and the President of the United States do not follow the precedent that was set by the Supreme Court, which is unprecedented, by the way. When the Supreme Court rules on a case, it is supposed to be the example that everybody follows. And the President of the United States, because he is the leader of the executive branch of government, is supposed to enforce the law. And what the Supreme Court ruled should have been the law that he enforced. But Andrew Jackson refused to enforce it. He ignored it. And he even made a public statement about it. It's not even like he shied away and acted like he didn't know what was going on. He fully admitted that he knew the Supreme Court ruled in the Cherokee's favor, but he publicly said, quote, the court has made their decision, now let's see them enforce it. In other words, he was just going to refuse to do his job. It's that simple. And the state of Georgia, therefore, did not feel obligated to follow the Supreme Court ruling either. So the Cherokee are going to be removed regardless of everything that they've done. And as you can see, this goes on for like 8 years. If you do the subtraction there from the time the Indian Removal Act was passed to the time when they were actually forced to leave, it's an 8-year period where they're trying all these other means like assimilation and the legal system to try to stay. And unfortunately, none of it ended up working. So they do end up being forced on an 800-mile march from Georgia to the Indian Territory. And this, of course, is called the Trail of Tears. They're treated very poorly on this journey, even though they were promised they would have food and supplies. Those things were not adequate, not even close. There's no medical treatment, so people were getting sick left and right and actually dying from their sicknesses. And unfortunately, it happened to be the worst winter that they had had in a really, really long time. You know how that happens every once in a while. Every once in a while, you just get a really bad winter out of nowhere. And they were marching in the winter, and it happened to be one of the worst on record. So it was just like everything was working against them. And 4,000 out of, I think, 18,000 ended up dying. It was pretty terrible. It was led by the military. The U.S. Army showed up at their villages and said, let's go. You can't pack anything. You're not allowed to take time to gather your things. We're leaving right now. You have to come with us. And if you resist, there's going to be trouble. So, of course, they didn't have the supplies they needed, and they weren't prepared. So that is the unfortunate story of the Cherokee. And as you can see, a lot of that will be on your quiz. They're from Georgia. Gold was discovered on their land. Georgia ignored the Supreme Court decision. And then the details about the Trail of Tears. I'm going to go back to the map to show you their journey, which will be this pink color. And, well, I guess it's a red arrow. If you follow that red arrow, that's the Trail of Tears. So they're going through Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri. Some of them branch off and go down into Arkansas, but I don't know if you know anything about those areas, especially Missouri. In the winter, it's pretty rough. And, you know, even though it's further south than Pennsylvania, that's a rough area in the winter. And considering this was the worst winter that they had had in a really long time, I'm sure it was brutal. And some of that journey is in mountains, so you can imagine it would not have been easy. And we have one more, and that's the Seminole. We've heard about the Seminole before. Remember, they were the ones that were causing issues along the Florida-Georgia border, and that's why Andrew Jackson went down into Florida and basically took over major parts of the Spanish-controlled Florida until Spain finally agreed to sell Florida to the United States. So the Seminole have been a thorn in Andrew Jackson's side for years, going back to before he became president. They are living in Florida, and the reason they're being removed specifically, why people are upset with them, it goes back to that story. They were hiding runaway slaves. They were still doing it even after Florida became a state. They're still helping slaves run away from plantations in the Deep South and hide in these Indian villages. And they were just kind of like taking them in as their own. So plantation owners and other Americans are worked up about that. So the Seminole are told to leave, of course, and the Seminole do not react very well to that order. They actually start the Second Seminole War. So the First Seminole War was with Andrew Jackson back in 1819 when we got Florida, and now they're going to start the Second Seminole War, and that's going to lead to a Third Seminole War. So basically, over the course of several years, maybe more than several, they're on and off fighting, on and off battles between the United States Army and the Seminole tribe in Florida. In many cases, Seminole Indians lost and were forced to relocate to Oklahoma anyway, regardless of their efforts. But in the end, honestly, the U.S. ended up giving up and saying, you know what, it's not worth it anymore. This dragged on for years. They ended up giving up and just allowing the Seminole to stay in Florida. And so even still today, there's a very robust Seminole community in Florida. So that's kind of a neat ending. These are the different options. You know, do you sign a treaty and just go peacefully? Do you resist? Unfortunately, they resisted but lost. Do you try the legal system? Do you try to assimilate? That didn't work. Well, these people ended up fighting and actually getting to stay. So that's why I picked these 4 tribes, because they all had slightly different outcomes. I wanted you to see that it wasn't just one size fits all. And the Seminole on here are the yellow. You can see their journey was pretty long. Those Seminole that did get removed, a lot of them are actually going to go via the Gulf of Mexico and then up the Mississippi River at New Orleans, and then head over to Oklahoma. So you can see Oklahoma was divided into these different territories, like these different reservations, I should say. So the pink reservation is going to be for the Cherokee, the light green is for the Creek, the dark green is for the Choctaw, the purple's for the Chickasaw, and the yellow is for the Seminole. So if you ever go to Oklahoma, you'll find that in many cases it's still divided up like this, and there is still Indian land that is supposed to be independent of the United States. It's a very tricky and fluid situation, actually. The arguing over who has jurisdiction in these reservation areas. All right, so hopefully that helps you visualize and understand what's happening here. But as you can see, they're all east of the Mississippi River. So if you find the Mississippi River there in the middle of the map and look to the right of it or to the east, that's where they all are. And they're being told to leave that area and go to Oklahoma. All the arrows are leading to Oklahoma. And that about does that. Yep, that's everything. So if you have any questions, let me know. Tomorrow you'll be learning a little bit more about Indian removal, actually different perspectives of famous people from the time, so you can get a feel for the two sides of the story. And you will have a quiz on Indian removal on Monday. It's 6 points.